Hello and welcome to week one, day two of the Web Development Technologies course, summer 2025-26. In today's video, what we're going to go over is I'm going to go ahead and just do the written test, just show you how to get to that, take that test, submit it, just the basics there, just to help you get started with that. Then after that, I'm going to go ahead and go through not all of the labs and exercises, but we're going to go through a few of them. And as part of that, we'll end up going through Visual Studio Code a little bit and talk about GitHub Desktop and checking in your code and so forth. And then after that, I'll go ahead and do a lecture over chapter 2, and we'll walk through probably the other assignments. I won't need to because they're similar. Everything's kind of similar. Chapter 1, as far as the book assignments are concerned, but chapter 2 also has an additional homework assignment outside of the book. So I'll go ahead and walk through that just to kind of explain how where to put that. Okay. All right. So first thing here, let me refresh my page. So I'm gonna change my view to student view. It'll be the same as what you're seeing. And then I'm gonna come down over here to coursework. And then, obviously you can click this first one. Did want to mention, I think I might have mentioned this yesterday. Yeah, I'm almost sure I did. But, a lot of times do next. This isn't always necessarily going to be what you need to do next. Obviously, if something is due earlier than something else, right? Because a lot of times if there's multiple things are all due the same day and same time, it's just going to be kind of the first one in the list, so to speak, but not necessarily the first one you need to do. Obviously, if something is due earlier, then that's going to end up being the first one in the list, and then it makes it a little more relevant, right? So the important ones usually like the hands-on test. You kind of want to make sure, not the written test, but the hands-on test. You want to make sure you get them knocked out. But I'm going to come down here. I could have clicked that one up there, but I'm just coming down here. This is the first written test, chapter 1. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to come over down here and choose Start. Okay. And while we're doing that, let's I'm just bringing up guide 1. Obviously, I don't, depends on how much screen you have and what you can do. So, this is how I got mine set up. I got Windows 11, so you can kind of, line things up. You can have multiple things on one screen. But however it works for you. And I'm not saying you have to use this guide. It's just available to you. And so most of the things that are going to be in this test are going to be covered in this guide. Okay. So let's just go ahead and start the very first question here. The blank is a term used to describe, maybe make it just a little bit larger so you guys can see it. The blank is a term used to describe the ever-growing number of devices connected to a network, right, including televisions and appliances. So I know we talked about this yesterday. It's about how early on, obviously, everybody was just accessing the internet with computers. Then it became phones. Now you've got televisions, appliances, sensors, everything else, right? So the correct answer on that is it's not the World Wide Web, right? It's not the internet backbone or the domain name system. It is Internet of Things, right? So we're going to choose that. The world's largest network is so we know it's not the Internet of Things. We already kind of covered that. Intranet, remember the intranet is usually like a corporate network that is closed off. It's just private for maybe employees, right? And then extranet was about having a network available for companies that companies that are part of like your supply chain, maybe like as far as vendors and different things that are involved in your day-to-day business, and you have partners where you have an extranet site for them, right? So that wouldn't be the world's largest network. It would be, of course, number 1. should be pretty easy for you, and some of them might be a little bit more complicated, but they should be pretty easy. So and I'm really not looking through this, but most of things will be in here. If you ever have to, like maybe this one here is a device such as a computer, tablet, or smartphone connected to a network. You probably it's from my perspective, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but maybe it's not, right? So you may want to kind of look up something in the guide. So here's like a node. I've got to give you the answer here. Is any device connected to a network, such as a computer, phone, printer, right? So there you go, right? Pretty much spells out the exact answer there. So I'm going to choose node for that one. The blank page is a website, typically provides information about a website's purpose and content, often by including a list of links or other pages on the website. Right? So we know it's not a server, right? It's not tools, tables. This is pretty self-explanatory. These are pretty basic here. So it's basically your home page, right? That's the initial page you come to, right? It has the basic information about whatever that website's about, and usually has links to other things as well, right? A blank is a host computer that stores resources and files for websites. Is a host computer, right, that stores resources and files for websites. So a host computer is not going to be something that's going to store for websites, not going to be on the client side, unless, well, when we do a lot of development, it's maybe actually a little different because from our perspective, we're kind of doing everything, on our own thing. But, in the real world, when you've got a real website that's actually deployed, right, the client is just the browser, right? The browser, and the browser renders what comes from the server, right? So all the resources and files will be on the server. Okay, a blank is a set of rules that defines how a client workstation can communicate with the server. So if you recall yesterday, we talked about things such as HTTPS, FTP, there was that TCP, IP, all of those things, and all of those things are considered protocols, right? So we're looking for protocols here, and there we go. So a set of rules, always remember rules are protocols. Blank is a set of rules for exchanging text, graphics, and sound, video, and other multimedia files on the web, right? A set of rules. So as we learned yesterday, and actually we probably didn't even talk about these other ones, so it should be pretty self-explanatory here. Basically, this is the World Wide Web, right? Text, graphics, this is all the stuff we see on the web, and everything on the web is based on the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Okay. So 192.168.1.5 is an example of a transmission control protocol. No. A domain name number. It's a IP address. An internet protocol, it's considered an IP address, right? And if you recall yesterday, we talked about, well, we're going to be talking about here again in the next question, it looks like. DNS, right? DNS takes you type in a name into your browser, say it's ESPN.com, and the domain name, I always used to call it a domain name server, because actually that's what you're kind of hitting. That's how we always talked about it before, but I guess they kind of changed that a little bit. They called it the domain name system, and maybe that was always accurate. I don't know, but we always call them domain name servers, and that's what it is. It's a server that actually takes the domain name and goes ahead and changes that to an IP address, right? So that is the next question down here. The blank was created to resolve the difficulty of remembering and using the IP addresses to access websites, right? So that is the domain name system. Number 10, in order to view a web page or any type of website, a device needs to have a web installed. And that would be to view a web page, obviously a browser. A blank is a private network that uses internet technologies to share company information among employees. Kind of talked about that at the beginning here. And obviously, we did review that yesterday as well, and that is the internet. Just watch the spelling, intranet as opposed to internet. You know, it's very close as far as spelling. A blank is an address of a document or a file accessible on the internet. Okay, so that would be a URL, Uniform Resource. It's a address. Basically, it's part of a part of the URL, right? That actually is the place where that file is on that the server. Okay, an example of a present in a browser, index.html. Actually, that's the same thing. That is a uniform resource locator. Instructors use a blank to communicate announcements, post questions and reading material, list contact information, and provide access to lecture slides and videos. So what we're kind of using is actually what this thing here is itself, right? It's actually called a learning management system. That's what Inside Rankin is a learning management system. And actually, let me see in this guide. It's not in there. It does mention it, including which categories, websites, including Learning Man. But yeah, it doesn't really. Oh, let me see what else we got down here. Okay. All right. Nope, that wasn't actually included. So it's learning management system. A blank is a private network that uses internet technology to share business information with selected corporate partners or key customers, and that is called an extranet. Blank allows developers to create one website that provides an optimal viewing experience across a range of devices. Okay. So this one, let me see, did we actually talk about this? I think it's going to be in here. I don't know what happened on that. Responsive design. So, you could have actually searched for some other things. It actually is, but is an approach where a single website adapts to the layout and fits all signs of the visitor screen, right? So it's called responsive design, right? All right. A blank is a simple visual guide. Let me see, make sure I did that right. Okay, visual guide that clearly identifies the location of the main web page elements, such as navigation area, organizational logo, content areas, and images. It's a simple visual guide. Okay, two different ones. It's not going to be a singleton. Actually, that's a programming concept, and then it's not a proxy. But it could, prototype. You could see, well, maybe it's a prototype. Actually, it's probably going to be a wireframe. I think is the correct answer there. Prototype is a little more involved. The wireframe is a very simple. You just kind of build this little quick wireframe. And usually you iterate over that wireframe till you get all the functionality, kind of laid out that you want to have, right? Usually start with something very basic, right? Hypertext markup language combines the tags and the descriptive attributes that define how a document should appear in a web browser. Combines tags and descriptive attributes define, yes, I would say that is true. The mission of jQuery is to drive broad adoption and ongoing development of key JavaScript solutions and related technologies. So jQuery is actually a library. It's a JavaScript library. So that's their, this is more of a organization that kind of does this, right? Drives broad adoption and ongoing development. So I would say that would be false there. And actually, if I kind of recall that, I think that the answer key is wrong on this one, because a library doesn't drive broad adoption and ongoing development. I don't know, but I believe this is false on that one. A text editor allows dragging HTML elements onto a page. Right. So we talked about what a text editor is, and basically a coding editor, kind of like what we're going to be using Visual Studio Code. And then there are also those WYSIWYGs, right? The WYSIWYGs, which is like Dreamweaver, where you can actually just drop things on there. So a text editor does not allow that. So that would be false on that one. Okay. And so if you do answer all your questions and you don't submit your written test, if you have all your questions answered and you've forgot, sometimes students don't always submit it, but if you answered all the questions, usually what will happen is by the end, when that deadline comes, it's just going to automatically grade whatever what you did, right? If you saved progress, right? If you save your progress. But it's best just to go ahead and submit the written test, right? So I'm going to just go ahead and submit that. And let's see what it says. It's not going to tell you right now. Okay. I think there were some certain features, but so what we'll do is next week, next Monday, we'll just kind of review some of them, okay? And we'll go through a few of them, especially if there's some discrepancies between what you answered and what you didn't. Let's see. Turn in Chapter 1, Introduction to Internet Test. There we go. Sorry. I'm not really used to doing it. I only do it like one time a semester, really. You guys do it all the time, because you're doing all the tests. Okay, there's that. Let's look at the full history, and I'm thinking that, let's see here. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe you're not going to be able to see the answers. And I believe that that's what it's going to be. You're not going to be able to see the answers until you're past closing. And the one I think that it was wrong here, and I can change it. It's not really that big of a deal unless it's a big deal to you. But I think it's that one that we're talking about, the jQuery one. I disagree with that one. I think that's, because jQuery is just a library. It's not really, but maybe I'm mistaken there as well. So, but there you go. If you kind of followed along there, you should also receive a 95%. If you want to change that other one to true for that jQuery one, you'll get 100%. Okay. All right. Basically that's what you're going to be doing for each one, right? And then if you come in here and you feel like you're ready to do the next one, you can just actually click on there and do the next one, right? All depends on where you're at, but you may want to come back. Probably best to keep things together, do your written test. First you probably want to read the book, look through the quick guide, get familiar with all the concepts, then go ahead and do that written test. Or you can do all your labs first, then come back and do your written test last. That's up to you, okay? Just remember though, if you don't finish your written test by that deadline, you can't turn that one in late, right? A lab or that you can turn in late, which I highly suggest you try to avoid that at all costs as well, but just wanted to mention, right? So, make sure you get your written test done before the due date, right? Because you cannot do them after that. All right. So we got that done. So next, let's go ahead and work on our labs. So let me pull up. Actually, let me do it this way. So once again, obviously you to do this, obviously you have to have your repository cloned, right? So you have to have that all those files, all those folders on your local machine, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and click here and show and explore. So that's going to pop open exactly where that is, okay? And what we're going to do here for this is we're going to kind of be using this HTML CSS, right? That's the book we're doing. All these other ones you can kind of ignore, okay? And like I said, never do anything with this .git one. And once again on that, if you don't have that, so if I'm gonna go down here to options, if you want to see hidden files, sometimes, especially from a programmer standpoint, a lot of different framework, not necessarily frameworks, but some kind of config. If you're using different things, that it's kind of beneficial for you to see those. So you can click, and I'm using Windows 11. It might look a little different if you've got Windows 10. But if you come down here to hidden files and folders, so by default, it's always going to be by don't show. This is something that you can change. Hit apply, and that'll apply. And that way you can see the hidden file, right? But once again, I'll click on this, but you don't want to mess with anything in here, okay? Because basically what this is doing is it's tracking your changes, okay? And that's how it knows. That's how GitHub Desktop knows. And actually, this is Git. This is that installation of Git that you did, and that's a source control, right? The source control, and the most popular one. It's become the most popular one. Now, as far as source control, this ain't, the only one. Companies sometimes have their own. I've worked with multiple different ones. It depends on the company, organization. But Git is a very popular one. It's, it's free, it's open sourced, all that kind of stuff, right? But once again, you don't really want to mess with that. And that's just going to track all the changes you made, right? And once you make some changes, and I'm going to actually end up showing you this at a point when we get at that point, you'll start seeing changes in here, okay? So we'll come back to this later. Okay, so for the first half of the class, right? This first half of the semester, I should say, you're really only going to be working in this HTML CSS one. Okay, the other ones you don't have to worry about. Midterm, that's where we're going to do our web portfolio. So we're going to get to that here around the midpoint. But everything in our HTML CSS book you can do all within this directory. Okay. Now basically in the data files directory, this is where you're going to do those labs and exercises. Okay. And this is all the book related stuff. Anything that has to do with the book, you'll do all within here. Right. Any hands-on tests. So next week we'll have a hands-on test. So in here, they're numbered, not hot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You'll go ahead and you're going to use each one of these to do those assignments. All right. And then the homework, we're going to have some extra, and we may not be doing homework on each one of these, but these are the ones that potentially could have some homework assignments. Okay. And so there's a separate homework assignment for chapter 2 and one for chapter 3. Okay. So that's where you do that. Okay. Now for all of the stuff directly out of the book, that's all in data files here. So we're on chapter 1 here. Now you can do this different ways. Okay. So like in Visual Studio Code, it depends on if you can right click sometimes. And, I know some students have had problems getting that configured right for some reason or another. But you can right click usually and then like open with code, right? You might have to choose show more options or something, but you should have that, okay? Now some students do think, and this is personal preference. I would suggest you don't open up like your whole direct, do this whole thing within code. It'll open that whole folder, which is fine. And, sometimes I can understand it being a little convenient, The problem is you start getting a lot of things open, you get things confused, you accidentally change things in the wrong directory, kind of, if you kind of just open up what you really need, it kind of makes it, from me, less clutter, makes things easier for me to manage, right? So from my perspective, what I would kind of do is, if I'm working on the chapter one stuff, I just right click and open this in code. Or, you may just even want to do one single one, right? You may want to just do one single one. That way you don't get things messed up, okay? We'll talk about that a little bit more. You just want to close things out because especially some of these assignments are going to tell you create an index.html in one, and then it's going to say create an index.html in the other one, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing it in the right directory and stuff, and you can get confused when you have multiple things open in Visual Studio. So, but what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just go ahead and open this up in code. So if you have everything, you should have everything configured. You want to trust the author. So here is, let me make this big for now, and it's always going to come out with this welcome one. First thing, just close this out, and then over here on the right-hand side, I'd close this as well. Give yourself a lot of room. Now, one thing I think I'm going to do here because. And this is something you're not going to need to do. So let me see here. I have different profiles. You're not going to need to do this. I'm trying, and mine have some different things in it. This is the one I kind of created for this course that has the same extensions that you have. So I'm just going to use that. I can see why. It's missing some things I kind of enjoy, but that's okay. So we can talk about some other extensions as well, but, and it might be sometimes it needs to like refresh to get everything you need. But so here's the different ones. We got analyze, apply, extend, etc. Right? So if we go over to let's put that over here and let's use our book. Where's our book stuff? I think it was here. Okay. Let's move that one over there. Close that. Okay. So here is our book. And then HTML module 1, obviously making it bigger is easier to see and stuff. So for number 1, we're going to kind of go down and, go through some of this, at least go through the chapter summary. You also got the guide as well. So you have an apply, extend, and analyze, right? And then we're going to have in the lab and consider this your turn, right? So you'll have assignments in all of these. We will, if you read the assignment, actually I probably should pull that up real quick. Let me just pull that up. Okay, so I'm back in our course. I'm going to coursework now. And as you see, just for the heck of it, you can see that since I did the chapter 1 written test, that's gone from here now. Just going to the next one in the list. So I'm going to go to coursework here. And then come down and I'm going to number chapter 1, labs and exercises. Right? And then I'm also go to chapter 1 here. And like I said, we use Google Docs for this. You can, drag this onto a bar. You can, you may want to bookmark it. You don't have to. You just can come back to it, but just an option. But so basically, here's the for chapter 1. You've got apply your knowledge, right? Like once I mentioned before that the book numbers for these assignments below may vary. Okay, that might be a little bit different because the book I used when I created this was kind of a different ISBN, and so it just was a little bit different. So it may be off a little bit. But you got to apply your knowledge, right? Extend, analyze, right? So all of those are going to be in your HTML, CSS, data files, chapter 1, right? All three of them under apply, extend, analyze, basically the one I opened up, right? I opened up chapter 1, okay? Now there is some other one. Oh, and then also this one here. Let's see. No, okay. So these here are going to be under data files, but the reason that these are in a different spot is these ones from chapter 1, then the chapter 2, chapter 3, etc. Basically, you do the assignment, right? And then when you complete that, you get graded, you're done. You don't add to it, right? It's kind of one and done type thing, right? For each of those, for each chapter. Now, the other ones, like dog grooming, strike a chord, and wild rescue, all of those are build on each other. You're going to do a little bit in chapter 1, then you're going to do a little bit in chapter 2. So it changes. It's going to change throughout the first half of the semester, okay? So that's why they're in a different directory. Now I do want to mention also, there are some files. I don't think for chapter 1 and chapter 2, but we get to chapter 3 with there's images. There may be some things that you're going to copy, okay? You might have to copy over into where these are, okay? Because I know there's images. Those images aren't going to be there. These images are in the different chapter ones. So like chapter 3 starts talking about images, and so you might have to copy some things over, okay? And when I send a follow-up email, I'll mention that in there as well. Okay. And then also down here, there's some things for validating, to validate. So there's some assignments you're going to request you to validate. And we'll talk about that later. But okay, so that's that. Okay, so now we're back here and we're at our apply your knowledge is the first one. So let me make that big like that. Let's fix this. There we go. Okay, and then also in here on, just to make a little bit room, once you've got this opened, well, we need to leave this open for now. So the first one's apply, okay? They're not exactly in order here, but this one here. So let's go ahead and start on this assignment, okay? So instructions in this exercise, you will use your text editor to create an HTML web page. You'll add all the necessary basic HTML elements to the page. Okay, as shown. So it's kind of showing you this is what it's going to look like, okay? All right. So open your text editor and enter all the required HTML elements to create the basic web page, including doc type, etc., right? Use the file save, and it tells you where to save it, right? Chapter 1, apply, right? That's where we're at. Chapter 1, apply. So first thing we're wanting to do here on this is we're going to need to create a file to put it in, right? So a couple different ways to do this, right? Since you have this open here, you can just choose new file, right? That's one way. The other way is to right-click this and do new file. So either way on that, right? So I'll just go ahead and choose new file here, and we're going to do an index.html. Make sure it's always lowercase. Make sure you always have a dot and not a comma. And there you go. All right. So now we got our first file, right? Also make sure you don't have spaces. It's kind of a thing that early on students kind of make some mistakes and actually put a space in between something, right? So this is our first HTML file, right? Okay, So the next thing here, it's telling you to add these different tags, right? Including a doc type tag, right? The language tag for English. But what we can do here, I'm going to make things easier for you. And this is kind of a built-in feature. It's called Emmet abbreviations. And so you can use certain, you can use certain special characters or start a tag and like hit tab and it'll actually kind of build some things up for you a little bit, right? So what we can do here on this will kind of build out a basic template for you each time. So we're going to hit the shift key, okay? Hit the shift key and exclamation point. You're basically doing exclamation point, right? Right? And then hit the enter key. Okay? And so I'm going to make this smaller over here. I'm going to collapse this so we have a little more room over here. Let me move this over. So this is going to create your doc type, HTML. And as you recall, we talked about yesterday, by doing it this way, it doesn't have the number 5 in it, but this tells the browser, hey, render this as HTML5, right? Then we have our English tag. Oh, I'm moving some stuff around here by accident. Sorry, let me fix something. So our basically our language tag, and so what that will do, okay? What this can be used for is so just if you change this to French, all right, there's different options. There's different options here. So FR would be French, right? EN's for English, right? There's multiple different ones you can put in there, but that's not going to like convert your code, any text you have in here from one language to another. But it will signal to, like Chrome. Chrome has that built-in translation from different languages. So it does trigger Chrome, hey, this could be, this should be available to be in this different language. And so it kind of triggers that translation stuff. It doesn't force it to happen, but it just kind of, makes Chrome aware of that, okay? And another thing is it's helpful for those screen readers. We're talking about screen readers as well. So those screen readers also read those things as well, okay? So, and there's some other reasons as well, other benefits as well, okay? And then at the beginning of all of your and then next, you create your HTML tag, you always have to close it, right? Doc type tag doesn't have a closing tag, right? This is one time at the very top, that's it, okay? You don't worry about it after that. The HTML tag, you always have to close your HTML tag, right? This is basically your whole document, right? Okay? Then you have a head section, okay? Within your head section, it added some things which like you wouldn't necessarily always have. You don't have to actually put them there, but it's very important. So basically, here, you got the meta, and what a meta tag actually does. Okay, the char set is actually called a character set or a dictionary. It's used for translating the code into readable text on the screen. It's kind of UTF-8 is a universal standard character encoding for the web. And what it basically does, it includes all characters, punctuation marks, symbols, and even emojis for virtually every human language, right? So by you putting it there, it's pretty much, you're telling it, hey, I could use all these different things, right? So why it's important? So computers only understand numbers, basically zeros and ones. So when you type in like a letter, like an A, or a paragraph, a sentence, the computer saves all that as numbers. Computers only read numbers, right? Binary, zeros and ones, right? So if a browser tries to read the page with the, the wrong dictionary, if you have that, if that's wrong, it might, garble it, it could be all messed up. Okay. So it's very important to have that there. Okay. Um, the next one here is the viewport. Okay. And the viewport is, early on, this is, I don't want to say recent. I don't know what version of HTML, but so this tag is, it's kind of part of the responsive web design. Okay. It tells the browser how to control the page's dimensions. So, before there were smartphones and, basically everybody accessed web pages, on a desktop computer, everything was built and rendered for those, large desktops, usually like 980 pixels wide, right? Large screens, right? And then what they did is when for the phones, they ended up early on, they ended up just shrinking that down, right? They took the desktop and shrunk it down for the phone, but then you couldn't really read anything. It shrank it down so small that on that phone, you couldn't read all the text, right? So, so then you'd have to pinch and zoom to read everything. So what happens is this viewport tags kind of fixes that problem. Okay, it basically it tells the browser make the width of this web page. Okay, make the width of this web page match the physical width of the screen. So if you're on an iPhone, it sets the width to an iPhone screen, right? If you're on a tablet, to tablet size. Okay, it's all done based on what device is accessing it. Okay, and then that scale 1 point, and we'll talk about this more in the future. You don't really need to know this. The reason I'm going is because when we use these Emmet abbreviations, it automatically puts it in there. We'll go through it again. But this sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded to 1.0, means it's 100%. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. The next thing here, and very important, is document title, right? Document. And this is what you'll see in your tab. Okay. All right. So we're going to change that here in a bit. One other thing I want to mention is you come up here. Let me see. There's also, it depends on what you do. I'm always, just from a lot of times back in the day, not that long ago, and maybe some other editors don't have autosave. You used to always have to save it. You could file save or Control S to save. But if you just want everything always saved, okay, and that might be best so that you don't automatically build something, create something, forget to save it, close everything out, and you lost all your work. So you can click autosave there, right? So that it will automatically always save it. It'll be check marked. Okay. I just myself, even if I have autosave, I'm always hitting Control S just to save things just out of habit, right? But now we have saved something, right? So we have saved something within our directory structure. So now if I go over here to GitHub Desktop, look, here it is. It's showing that it's saved, right? Something's changed now that it's saved. Something has changed. Something is saved in a directory that Git is tracking, right? Git is tracking that, and GitHub reads Git to determine what has happened, right? So this has changed. Now, what you can do, maybe this is a little early to commit some code, and we'll probably wait till we're done with the assignment. I wouldn't wait until you're done with every assignment to begin committing your code. Every time you kind of get to one that's pretty close to being done, I'd commit it, right? Especially the smaller things. We're doing some simpler little exercises. They're not, too big. Now, when we start working on something a little more complicated, you may want to commit something multiple times just to make sure that it's committed, right? And another thing is, like I mentioned yesterday, as far as attendance, attendance is based on you submitting code. So, you build a little something, it's not completed. If you go ahead and commit that code, and I'll show you how to do that here later. once we finish this exercise, this specific one. But once you go ahead and commit that code, boom, it's going to be in GitHub, on that remote server, right? And we'll look at that too. But so it'll already be there, and then you'll be marked present for the week. So basically that's how easy it is to be marked present for the week. Very low bar. Okay. So now we've got this up. Let's see. Anything else? I think we're good for now on that. Here, I will show you. So we did do these extensions, right? One of these extensions was Live Server, okay? And so I will show you, let's show you how that kind of works. You right click in here, go down to Open with Live Server. And so there it is. We don't have anything in here, but you will notice up here, you see document, right? That's the title, right? We don't have anything else. These are just tags, right? These things, this is the only tag in a head section. This is basically the only tag that's ever going to kind of display anywhere, right? It's not going to display in the body, right? In the actual HTML right here, but it will be displayed up here in the browser tab, okay? These other things are informational purposes, right? They instruct the your browser what to do, right? Same thing with the this instructs your browser, hey, I'm using HTML5 and we're using the English language. So these are just instructions like for the browser. The users never see any of this stuff. They're not going to see anything except they're going to see this one. And then when we start putting things in the body here. Okay. All right. So let's go to the title here and let's go ahead and add that. So we're just going to go ahead and do chapter 1. Apply your knowledge. Okay, chapter 1, apply your knowledge. And if you make a little mistake here and there, it's not like I'm going to take off points for simple things, but you do kind of, especially early on here, it's asking you kind of do what I consider kind of silly thing. Well, not necessarily. It's just telling you put a space at, put a blank line. It's just trying to show you to kind of, space some things out in that, but so maybe early on, I'm going to kind of look for, it said to put a blank line. Did you put a blank line? But, as we move forward, it's not, as long as it's readable and you're doing the right thing there, it's not a big deal. But there you go. And actually, since it auto-saved, if you come over here on the right-hand side, obviously you can't see much because of, this is a little condensed, but it auto-saved. It's automatically going to update that, right, within Live Server. Okay. All right. Let's move a little quicker here in the body. So saying nest a paragraph element, okay? So we're in our body here, and I want to do a paragraph element. So what you can do, a paragraph element, a HTML paragraph element is just basically a p tag. And what you can do, kind of the same thing we did, we use that Emmet abbreviation with the exclamation point to create the basic structure here. But we can do for a paragraph tag, you can just hit the p tag and hit tab, okay? And that will put in your end one as well, right? And then here, what are we putting in? Chapter 1. It even helped me there with my spelling error. And sometimes there's things in here that's kind of get on your nerves. We'll talk about that. Some of these extensions, I'll show you how, if you really want to turn that off. Sometimes you got to restart Visual Studio Code though. But okay, hopefully I'm not missing anything. Okay, we got that. We did the title. You got to watch this, title element. You got to really read what it's kind of telling you. Title element. There's a title element, right? Here saying nest a paragraph, that's a P tag, right? Below the first paragraph, add another paragraph, right? And include your name and today's date. So I'm going to hit the P and a tab, and then I'm going to put my name in. And then today's date is what, 5/13. Okay. That looks good. See, so this is one where it doesn't know my name, right? So it's going to be an unknown word. It says C spell here, okay? So I'm just kind of wanted to show you how kind of where this is coming from, how this is happening, okay? So if we go over here to extensions, this code spell, this is it. So sometimes if some of this stuff kind of gets on your nerves, especially things like this, you can always right click and disable it, okay? Now, if you do that, you're actually going to have to restart this, so I'm not going to do it, okay? You'll have to restart Visual Studio Code and everything for that to take effect, okay? All right, so we're back to that. And as we can see, if you've got live server up and running, as you make changes, it automatically saves it, and it's going to keep on building that out, right? Okay. Below the first paragraph, you see, include your name and today's date. Below the second paragraph, add a thematic break. So a thematic break is called a HR, okay? Also called when I code it, especially early on, we never called it a thematic break, but and maybe we were incorrect. We call it horizontal rule, HR. That's what it actually is, a horizontal rule, right? So do HR, hit tab, okay? This is one that does have an ending tag. You can't put content in here. This is just creating a kind of a line, right? It automatically saves. So if I go over here, now you can see the line. Okay. Then it's saying create another paragraph tag. Hit P tab, and then name the text editor you are using. Visual Studio Code. Okay, that looks good. Below the third paragraph, that was the third one. Add another paragraph, summary of how to plan a website. Okay, so you may want to go back and look a little bit on that. Let me see what I'm going to put in here. Let's see. Before you begin, coding a website, you must, first create a wireframe and a sitemap. You should, probably must, but okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put a P tag here. Hit tab, and then I'm going to, before you begin coding a website, let's see, you should first create a wireframe and a sitemap. And, there's other things as well, right? So, you want to plan things out. You want to create a wireframe, a sitemap. You want to do the pour stuff, right? You want to define the purpose of the website, right? Who's your audience, all those different things, right? So you kind of want to include all of those, right? And then, whatever, right? I'm not going to be too picky on that. Probably should put a little bit more in that, but just to move forward here quickly, I'm going to stop there. Okay, so after that, add another paragraph that includes one sentence about what you've learned. Right, so another P, tab, and then, learned about extranet. So this is one that doesn't know what that means, right? Intranet. So there are always going to be certain things that little spell check's going to find. And not a big deal. Don't worry about it, okay? Not a big deal. Learned about the internet, what else did we learn? Learned different HTML tags, right? Whatever, etc. All right. Indent all nested elements. So by default, it probably should say these are nested. And this is by, this is actually using 4 spaces, right? A tab. So that looks good, right? Add blank lines between paragraph elements 3, 4, and 5. Between. So here's 1, 2, 3. So basically telling you to add one there. Just telling you for spacing. This is, I think it's a little carried away, but. So, okay. So adding blank lines, save your changes, and submit your file. So it's automatically saved, right? Obviously, always remember to check. Okay, this is autosave, you're good. If not, you can always do Control S to save it, or you can always do File, Save as well, which I always do Control S. Okay, 3 different options there. Okay, so now we go back to Visual Studio, not Visual Studio, we go back to desktop here, GitHub Desktop. And so here's everything we did. Looks good. So, okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and commit this, right? So I'm just going to say completed. Completed, apply your knowledge, okay? You can add more description, something bigger, you're doing something more significant. Probably really good idea, especially, when you're wanting to get things ready for an employer to see and stuff. It's probably best to have some descriptions for these simple little assignments. Not a big deal, but when you're doing a little more complex things, okay? Now, one thing I want to show you is there's 2 different things you have to do here, okay? Committing the file is not going to put it out there in Visual, not in Visual Studio. It's not going to put it out there on GitHub, the remote repository, okay? But it will do a commit, and this is just kind of still held locally, right? It's the whole tracking thing. So now if you hit commit here, okay, it's not in here. The changes have been committed, right? So you can commit changes without them actually being pushed to the remote repository. So what you'll need to do here is you need to do push origin, okay? Or sometimes it'll be up here. So sometimes, and especially if you end up moving away from things, sometimes, depends on what you're doing, you get yourself in a situation where this screen isn't here and you don't see push origin. But you can also see this up here. It'll tell you push origin. It'll tell you one thing has changed. One file's changed. That's what it's telling you up here. One file's changed. It hasn't been pushed yet, right? Let's just go take a quick look. View on GitHub. So here's my repository. Same as I've created one just like you as a student. And, I have mine out there for a little longer. I created mine a couple weeks ago, right? Nothing's changed, right? Now, let me close this. Now if I go ahead and push origin, okay, now it's pushed, right? Everything's up to date. And please don't forget to do that. That's kind of a, easy mistake to make, especially at the beginning. You don't want to, because if you don't push it, then I can't get it, and you're not going to be marked as present, right? So you need to make sure you commit and push. Now let's go ahead and open this back up again. And now you can see, complete it, apply your knowledge. Okay, 1 minute ago. Click on that, go to data files there, and then you can see, if I make that bigger, there's your file, right? But once again, you'll see it right here, right? You'll see your last commit. So obviously, the next time you submit something out, the next one, right, this is going to end up changing, okay? This will be the latest thing, right? You have to kind of drill down to make sure that everything's there, but okay. All right, so let's go ahead and do another one. So here, I'm gonna click on this. What's kind of good to do here, especially because, like I said, sometimes you're gonna be creating multiple index.html, so you don't get confused in that. Just close this one, right? Close this one out. Because it can become a mess. I'm bad about it. Also, I got all these files open. Then I get confused about something. I better start closing everything, right? Close it out so you're good, and so now you're done with that one, right? And also, don't get confused with these directories here, because there are some things that you may need to. I'm going to have to look at this a little bit. But for the most part, those other assignments need to go into that different directory, because they kind of keep building on each other, right? So it just makes more sense. But all right, so let's go ahead and work on the next one here. Okay, so the next one is we're gonna go ahead and do the extend one. So it'll be in the extend directory. We'll have to create a new file. So first, this one's kind of about standards guidelines, right? So we'll go ahead and open that up. So this is the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, right? So WAI stands for Web Accessibility Initiative, right? So this introduces the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, right? So these are just standards that are suggested to follow, and there's benefits for both government and individuals, and some of them are backed by laws as well, right? So it's developed through a process and cooperates with individuals and organizations around the world with the goal of providing a single shared standard for web content accessibility, right? Because like we already talked about yesterday, using those like alt tags for like images, things like that. So in case someone is visually impaired, they can't see an image, then you have text in there, so the screen reader will read that, right? And also there's things for audio, right? There's from the audio perspective, there's somebody that might be hearing impaired, and so that you can visually use captions, right? Use captions and things like that. So if someone's hearing impaired, they can go ahead and follow along, right? So things like that as well, right? And there's many others, ones that are related as well. Okay, so let's get back to our assignment. So above the introduction, select how to meet. So this is a quick reference here. So we've got these different guidelines, okay? We've got text alternatives, time-based media, etc. Okay, you know, you spend a few minutes looking through some of these if you get a chance. But we're going to actually end up taking this and putting this into our assignment and into our index.html file. So let's go ahead and get back here again. So okay, so review the various guidelines for Principle 1, Perceived 1.1 through 1.4. Open your text editor, right? Enter all required HTML elements, index.html. So we're back to extend here, right? So once again, you can right-click and hit a new file, or, you know, since you have this selected, you can go up here, right? New file. Also, at some point in time, you'll have to create new folders as well, okay? And another thing, you know, be careful about moving a lot of stuff around. Anything you put anywhere you put anything in this directory, it's going to show up, right? It's going to show up in your GitHub desktop, right? It's going to show up in here. So kind of want to be careful about what you put in there, you know, kind of keep only the assignments you need. If you have some problems with that and it gets real too, too messy, I can help you clean it up. But sometimes it gets to a certain circumstance where, you know, you're just always selecting certain things because you got a bunch of stuff in there you don't need. Okay, so in here, I'm going to just go ahead and choose new file, and we're going to do index.html here. All right. And then once again, so like we did the last one, we can do a shift key exclamation point, hit enter, right? And we've got our document now, right? Move over here. All right. Okay, add a language attribute, we've already got that. Add our character set, we've got that. Add our title element, right? So we're going to do chapter 1, extend knowledge. In the body, so in our body tag, we want a paragraph. Hit P, tab, and then we do chapter 1. All right, got that done. Below the first paragraph element, add another paragraph element. P, tab, name and date. Helps if I spell my name right. And my date, the date is 5/13. Okay. Once again, just having you practice. HR tab. Okay. Below that, add another paragraph. And you want to do understanding guideline 1.1 followed by 2 blank lines. Include a summary. Let me look at this a little bit. All right, so we're going to do 1.1 through 1.4. Okay, so let's go back over here. So you can just go ahead and copy some of the stuff, okay? I'm fine with that. Provide text, alternatives, grab all of that. I should have just grabbed it all in the beginning. Okay, so you just kind of do that for each one of these. I lost my browser. I'm just going to move it over here. It's easier for me to do it that way. So I'm going to do guide 2.2. I think I put my HR tag in the wrong place. All right. All right. P tag, tab. Okay, and then which one is 1.3? So I'm going to do another P tab. And what was that? 1.3. Adaptable. Guide 1.3 is adaptable. Actually, there's characters that you can enter because sometimes you got to watch certain things you put in HTML because it can sometimes be misconstrued as being something else. The browser thinks it's a special character. You know, some special characters cause problems. I don't want to spend some time right now talking about that. So I'm just kind of getting rid of that just to so you didn't see that little message there. But not a big deal. It probably worked fine. It's just kind of a warning, but it's a valid warning that you really should adhere to make sure that that you do that correctly, because some things can cause some problems. All right, and then we'll do another P, and that was for what, 1.4. All right, guideline 1.4, distinguishable. Let's get rid of that. Make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. I don't know what happened on that one. All right. Is everything good? Everything looks good. Looks happy. All right. Let me get back to this. All right, so we got 1.3, got 1.4, indent all nested elements. Everything's indented. Save your changes. Add a blank, verify you've added blank lines after each paragraph. Element below the semantic break, the horizontal rule. So it's just telling you after each one, enter. This is obviously going to look different. You make this bigger, right? So just telling you have a blank line after each one. And there you go, right? And once again, now we really didn't look at it, but if you go ahead and right click and open a live server, you'll see it all. Here's your text, each one of those, your horizontal rule, name, and everything's in the title is correct as well. Everything looks good, okay? So we can go back and once again, come back to GitHub desktop. You can see things have changed. We completed the extend one. All right. Once again, you're going to go ahead and commit that. And now we know once we commit it, we have to also push it. it's almost instantaneous. It should be there. Complete it. So like I said a little bit ago, it's going to replace whatever was the last one, right? But obviously when you start digging down a little farther, it's going to be the last one. Once we get to the next level, there you'll see the different ones. There's the apply one, there's the extend one, right? So it always just, when you're higher up, when you've got a folder that's being shared, right, by different changes, then it's just always going to be the last one. But once you get to the specific folder, then you're going to see completed apply, completed that, you're done, right? So we got the first written test done, we got the first apply, we got the first extend done. Okay. Next, so I'm going to close this out. Let's go to analyze. So the analyze one, well, here, let's go to the directions. Do this the right way. So for the analyze one, open your editor, right? So it's already got an index.html, right? Open it up, correct the doc type tag, place the HTML start tag on a new line, add the appropriate attribute to specify the English language, right? So we've got some multiple things we need to do here. Basically what we're doing is we're going to fix this. So we've got these all closed. We're good. Everything's clean. This was already in here in the analyze, right? So obviously, it doesn't have everything right, right? They're all crunched together, missing some things. So we want to go ahead and fix that up, right? So let's go ahead and just put this on a new line, right? And you can always have this spaced. Usually, you just have HTML at the same levels, the doc type. What did we do for the others? I'm sure that's what it did, yeah. HTML. So, okay, the doc type here, so what do we have? DOT, we've got it spelt right. What do we got to do? Change on here to make it right. We got to put an exclamation point there, right? We've got to space. See, it's kind of telling you something's wrong here a little bit, right? And then we put HTML here, right? Now it's happy, right? Whoop. Watch that. Let's make this lower. Okay, so now that's good. We have that HTML, right? But this has got heal. Who knows what that's all about, what that's doing. Obviously, well, I probably should really read the directions. I'm just kind of doing my own thing. Correct the DR tag. Where's the DR tag? Oh, there is a DR tag. Properly close the head element, right? So we already know, just from our other ones. So after the HTML tag, we have a head element, right? And that's misspelled. So let's change that to head. And then after that head, we have a title. And that is spelled wrong as well, right? So here we want to end that title. And if you just kind of put in, like in this case, since we're kind of fixing something that's already there, obviously we showed how we use the Emmet abbreviations just to add, to get those tags there. But in this case, we didn't have it. So basically you start it, it'll kind of suggest what to put there, and that's what we want there, right? So here we want to just go ahead and do chapter 1, analyze. And let's see. Okay, so there's our title. We're good there. And we have our meta tag. Our head's wrong here. So move that out of the way for now. So the meta tag, we have attributes, right? Meta tag has one. It's not a closing tag. Title is an open and closing tag. The meta tag's not, right? So here we're going to do char set equals, and we want to just type in UTF TF-8. Okay. So that's self-closing tag, and you go hit the backspace to put that back over there so it's lined up right. And then after that, that's where we need to close our head tag, right? We actually have it down there. We'll just grab it, whatever, it doesn't matter. Or I just delete it. No, that didn't work like I wanted to. All right. All right, so things are looking good now on that. We got our doc type HTML. We have HTML. We have our head. We closed our head. We're good there. We got our title tag. We do the meta one correctly. Char set equals. That looks good. Okay. Then we have our body tag. And then what are we wanting to do on this? Improve its own paragraph element. Review. Add your name. Okay. So here's our body tag. And obviously we've got, let's see what we got here. Yeah, this is all kind of a mess, but they do that. All these analyzed ones are for that purpose, right? That's a little bizarre. Okay, so we got our body tag. So let's go ahead and the first one is we'll do the, let me see here. Let's do the P. Let's do another P tag. And we're going to just put our name. And a date, right? Which is what? 5/13. Okay, and then we are chapter, and then you can just put the cursor there, click there, hit tab, right, to move that. We have to close that one. Let's just kind of get rid of this stuff. I'm just going to get rid of it. This is meant to be an HR tag, right? But I'm just going to kind of get rid of that. And then once again, you could hit the angle bracket, and it'll kind of give you a hint what to do. You can do it yourself, whatever. So there's our P tag. We've got that chapter 1. Then after that, we need to put a horizontal rule, HR tab. So we got that now. Here, just for the heck of it, let's see what happens here. Probably should have done this actually earlier. Open in live server. Let's see what we got. So sometimes, believe it or not, you know, the browser actually kind of takes care of things. Even though there's errors, it kind of hides some of that stuff, believe it or not, right? Another thing is, we'll learn about this later. Let's see if this is going to tell you that this is a little messed up. No, that's pretty unbelievable, to be honest with you. Okay. Even that messed up, it's still going to display it anyhow. But sometimes there's certain things that are not going to display. Okay, so let's get back here. Let's finish this thing up here. All right, what do we have here? We have chapter 1, improve. We got our HR. Then this is a uppercase P. It's just kind of showing you that, you know, you have to do these things correctly. Right, and then we're going to do that one. Here we can just hit a tab. So we get that P. So that for fun, the next one is what? HTML 5.2. Here it's just having extra tags, right? You don't need. Well, whenever you have an opening tag, you need to have a closing tag, right? Here you've got you can't have two opening tags like this, even though the browser's still taking care of that. But you know, you might bring it up in another browser and it's going to be a problem, right? So we're just fixing these up. You use a text editor. Let's see. All right. And then what else is after that one? All right. Sorry, I'm kind of regressing here a little bit. All right. So I'm just going to fix this because I'd rather just do it this way. HTML5. I don't know why it's, what is, I think that's a little bizarre all they're doing there. Okay. Here they got all uppercase. You really shouldn't be doing that, right? But I'm just going to go ahead and put that in here. Fix this up a little bit. I don't know why they could at least put the right version. 5 is the latest version of HTML. Okay, we're going to end that P tag there. And the P tag, and just move this down to the next line. I'm kind of sorry, I'm kind of making this a lot more difficult than it needs to be. Then we got a new one here. Let's close that out. HTML is rendered within a page. We'll just delete that. Okay, we got all our P tags, and the book loves to have spaces, so I'm just hitting the enter key here, right? Enter key, right? And one thing I do, should mention real quick here, let's just, since I'm here, so let's just say you do a whole bunch here, right? Let's go ahead and go look at this in Live Server. Those spaces don't matter, right? The browser doesn't do anything with the spaces. That's only for readability, right? Everything we're doing there is basically just for readability, okay? So let's do that. Let's do that one. And then what are we missing here? We're missing our body tag, right? So we have to end our body tag. It knows it, And then what are you missing after that is basically our HTML tag, right? Okay, there we go. So we fixed that up. It's right now. Like I said, though, sometimes the browser will still sometimes show that. Oh, actually, here, let me let's make sure that this is working right. Okay, we're good. All right. So there we go. We've got all that. And here, like you got all these lines. Not a big deal here, really, but, probably should clean this up. You can hit the end key, control end, right? Delete, right? So, all right. That looks good to me. Fix that up. And now we can go ahead and commit that one. Which one was this? This is analyze, correct, improve. And so there's that one, right? Telling you. And this is why it's really a good idea to do this often, because otherwise you start having a bunch of different files in here and it can get kind of messy after a while, So I suggest you do it often, right? And especially if you're working on something big, and there's It's a little story I can tell you. This, they always tell us, make sure you check stuff in before you leave for every day. At least, you should say before you leave for every day, check something. Check in what code you're working on. Well, had this one programmer. She was working on something for quite a long time, right? Well, she didn't check anything. She had everything local. She didn't check anything in for like weeks. All of a sudden, she had a hard drive crash, and then they actually ended up getting it back. She turned it over to the IT department. They ended up getting it back. But if sometimes that doesn't always work. She would have lost all that code, right? So always make sure you check in code. You never know what can happen, right? Okay, so we completed analyze, correct, improve. Probably should put chapter 1, right? That probably should have done that for all of them, but that's okay. So commit domain, make sure you always push. And always it's good, especially early on here, always good to verify. So you're sure that you've checked in your code, right? Because and besides that, besides the attendance part, the other part is if you don't have your code in, then it's going to be considered late, right? So you need to make sure you have your code in by the deadline. Okay. Okay, so I hope that helps. Okay, let's look at the assignment for chapter 1 again. Pull that up real quick. All right, so we did these. So the next thing is the dog grooming one, strike a chord and wild rescue. And like I said, for that one, you'll need to do that in these, right? Dog grooming, strike a chord, wild rescue. All right, you can skip exercise 1 and 3 in your turn. Okay, this is your turn exercises that's on the book, right? The only one you're going to be doing is dog grooming. Okay, and then in the and then the other ones are strike a chord and wild rescue, right? You can skip lab 3. So this is under the exercise, this is under the lab, right, within the book. So back to that real quick. Oh, I pull the book up. So in here, let's go to that. So you got in the lab, okay? Now you got to watch. So this is strike a chord. Just follow this, just like you would the other. It's telling you to create a web page. Let's see, use a save chapter 1 lab 1 folder with a name plan to create the web page. That's fine. So in this instance, I guess we're fine with doing it that way. Just follow what it says here. I know I created that own directory that's separate. Eventually, though, okay, this is kind of just the plan document stuff. But when we start doing things that one's going to build on the other, we don't want to do it in the same spot. Right? I mean, we don't want to do it in a chapter directory because then what happens when you go to the next, you have to copy it all over and, that's kind of a mess. But go ahead and follow this for now and we'll review this. Obviously, if you put something in the wrong directory, I'm going to be looking, right? Yeah. Yeah, we'll just have to talk about this. Okay, the first chapter maybe you're fine, but it's just going to make much more sense because otherwise you're going to have to do whatever's chapter 1 and then copy everything over to chapter 2 and then start there. And then as opposed to just having one directory where you just keep on making additional changes. But if you want to follow this right now, what it says, I'm fine with that. We'll have to talk about it though. We'll have to make sure we have that in sync. I apologize. But I just don't like how they have this set up where you can, you don't want to kind of keep on doing that in every single chapter folder for the things that are going to be constantly changing. So, all right, we'll talk about that later. You just follow the directions for now. Don't worry about it. I'll look for where you have your assignment at. All right. So let's go ahead and work on close some of this stuff out. Too much stuff. Let's go through chapter 2. Building a web page template with HTML. Okay. So we've kind of already done a little bit. We learned a little bit of this stuff in a way. But organizing your files, set up a root directory, subfolders, naming conventions for a website project, right? Use semantic elements. We'll talk about these a little bit. I know I mentioned them yesterday, just high level. But, you've got different, a long time ago, you used to use what's called a div tag, which, we'll be using some div tags. And then you'd had a div tag, and then you had a cascading style sheet that, was associated with the header one, which you just have div, and you named the class header. Then you have a div for nav. Well, then they started coming up with these semantic tags that actually mean something, right? So you've got actually a header tag, a nav tag, a main tag, a section tag. So you kind of know what that's about, right? What that's about, and it means something, right? We'll talk about a wireframe, creating reusable template. For us, a lot of stuff weird, especially we use that Emmet, the Emmet abbreviations where we do the shift, exclamation point, it's going to ask you to create a reusable template. You can start with that, right? So you're going to be very far on your way just by using that Emmet abbreviation, right? Write helpful comments. Haven't done that yet. So there's a certain way to write a comment that you can leave in your code. So next developer comes along, they understand what you're kind of doing, right? And also there's HTML entity names and numbers to display special characters safely. Remember when we were doing that assignment, it was kind of flagging something. That's because you've got to use a certain symbols for that. Okay. Pick the right heading level. Okay. We'll talk about headings. So there's H1 tags, H2 tags, etc., all the way through H6 tags. So there's a certain way to do that correctly. Okay. Validate HTML. So you run your pages through a W3C validator and you correct the common errors. Okay. From plan to template. Okay. So before writing any markup, right, basically your HTML, a web designer takes a few planning steps. This keeps the website consistent across every page and prevents surprises later, right? The template workflow, articulate the purpose of the website to identify the target audience. Create a sitemap showing how pages relate to each other. Design a web frame showing the layout of a single page. Pick colors, fonts, and graphics, right, that support the brand. Build a template containing the shared structure for every page. Clone the template to create each individual page, right? So it's basically telling you to create this template, and then you can just use it for every page, which is good from certain aspects. It becomes a lot more important if you're using, when we start getting into other things like cascading style sheets and stuff like that. But for our, a lot of stuff that we've done, like the Emmet abbreviations, boom, it's going to create that high level stuff. But, we're going to want to do a little more than that. Sitemap versus wireframe. These two tools have different purposes and are often confused. A sitemap is a collection of pages. A wireframe is a layout of one page, right? File management. Every website has many files, HTML documents, images, style sheets, scripts, and more, right? So keeping them organized. So here's an idea. So like my website, and then you've got index, about, contact, and then, we haven't gotten to style sheets yet, but this is kind of how you want to do some of these things, right? You want to have your images. You don't want to have your images at just kind of a root folder, right? Just dropping all the different images in there. You want to have an images directory, right? You want to have a scripts directory for JavaScript when we get there, right? It's going to be a while. Cascading style sheets, we'll be getting there. Chapter 3, we'll be getting to some of this, okay? So the home page always belongs in a root, that index.html. And like I mentioned yesterday, web servers automatically serve this file when someone visits your domain, okay? Which is why visitors don't have to type the file name in the address bar. Yeah, so whenever you go to some root directory, usually you're going to, there's some sophisticated things that some websites do, but generally when you go to the ESPN.com, right? Then it's automatically going to go to that index page, right? The home page. File naming and rules, use lowercase. So some web servers, okay, and it depends on the web servers, right? So some of these web servers run on different operating systems too, right? So, and most web servers, there's some Windows out there. There's a Windows servers out there, some Windows OS, but most of the time, most of them are not. Most of them are what's called a Linux operating system. Linux is the most popular one, and it's kind of been, it's works well with web related stuff and the internet. So most of the servers out there are actually Linux based. It's a certain operating system. So some operating systems handle things differently. That's why you kind of want to make sure. Sometimes Windows might find something if you have a uppercase A and a lowercase a for like about, it might find it, okay? But others won't. So you have to make sure, and especially if you're referencing them from somewhere else, right? So you want to make sure, and we'll learn when we start doing links, when we start linking pages together, you want to make sure that you've got your case right, your case correct. So best practices, always use lowercase for everything, so you don't have to worry about that. Never use spaces in a name as well, okay? Yep, and that's the next one right there. No spaces in the file names. Hyphens to separate words. I like hyphens. Some people like underscores. I used to do a lot of underscores. A lot of people I know. I've kind of really transitioned more to hyphens. I really like hyphens. So it kind of separates it, instead of having contact us being all one word, you could separate it. But never separate it with a space. Use descriptive names like product list HTML as opposed to something like page 3 HTML, right? Keep names short. Long file names make URLs ugly and hard to share. Very true. Nothing wrong with abbreviating things when needed. So let's talk a little bit about semantic elements. A semantic element is an HTML tag whose name describes the meaning of its content, not just its appearance. Semantic elements are called structural elements because they define the structure of a web page. Okay? So why semantic elements matter? Accessibility. Screen readers use semantic tags to help visually impaired users navigate directly to the main content, skipping past menus and headers. Okay. Search engines. Search engines give more weight to content inside a main and article than content in headers or footers. Okay. Readability. Code is easier to scan when tag names describe their purpose. Another developer can understand your page at a glance. Like I mentioned before, sometimes you use a bunch of these We used to just have div tags all over the place. We were just div crazy. You all use all these little div tags, right? But when you're using these semantic tags, it makes things much more readable. You understand what's going on just by quickly glancing at it. Styling. Semantic tags give CSS and JavaScript meaningful hooks without requiring extra class names. Okay, we'll learn about that as we go along. The div element, like I was just talking about, the HTML5 designer, web designers used the generic div element to divide page into sections. A div element has no meaning in its own. It's just a container. Each div typically needed a unique name given by an ID or a class attribute. Okay, we'll learn a little bit more about that. Okay, to distinguish them from other divs, right? So yeah, it was just kind of a generic container. So like I said, you have divs all over the place, but now within HTML5, added semantic elements so that common page regions have descriptive tag names. Many professional designers prefer these semantic tags over the generic div elements whenever possible. You still see div in modern code, but it's typically reserved for grouping content that doesn't fit a semantic tag. So we'll still use div tags here and there, but use a semantic tag whenever you can. So common semantic tags, header, kind of self-explanatory, right? Identifies the top region or page in a section, right? You see a header tag, you know it's a header. When you used to do the div tag, and it doesn't really tell you that, right? Site name, so typically content, your site name, a logo, a tagline, etc. Nav contains navigation links, a menu of page links to other parts of the site. Main, the primary unique content of the page. Typical content, article text, product listing, form, or whatever the page is about. Okay. Section, a thematic grouping of content inside the main. Okay. So a lot of times you break a page into different sections, right? So within the main tag, you can have multiple sections. Okay. An article, a self-contained content that could stand alone. Okay. A blog post, a news story, a product card, all within an article tag. Right. A side. A side tag is content related, but it's not part of the main content. Right. Sidebar, related links, pull quote, ads. Footer identifies the page region of a page or section, right? So there usually have a copyright, content information, page links, social icons. You do all that in the bottom, the footer, right? So yeah, it's important to understand the differences between a head. So we know the head tag, right? So that's the content that holds, that meta information, right? The meta information, the title, the character encoding. And we'll learn to also put style sheet links in there. Also, you could put links to JavaScript as well in there. So the visitor never really sees it directly. The only part that he would ever see is the title, right? That goes within the title of the browser, right? For this one, we got guide 2, right? And then, so that is a head. The header is the semantic element we were just discussing, and it's for the top of the visibility of the page or section, such as a banner, a logo, etc. Right? Heading refers to H1, H2. These things could be heading. This is a heading here. So a heading refers to certain tags. They're called heading tags. H1 is the biggest. H6 is the smallest. Sometimes you would think H6 would be the largest, but H1 is the largest. And you really have to, there's 6 levels, and you should follow them in a certain order, in that order. We'll talk about that. So semantic wireframes. A semantic wireframe is a wireframe that labels each region within the HTML5 semantic element. You plan to use it, as far as from a planning tool that bridges the gap between design and code. So here's a header, right? This is where you'd expect it, at the top of your thing, right? This is where, maybe over on the left-hand side, you might have a logo and the name of a company. Over the right-hand side, you may have maybe a profile picture of yourself, you're logged in, whatever, right? Nav, so here's a place that you could have some different navigation. Sometimes these things are kind of combined a little bit, but it's beneficial to kind of separate them out as well. So nav, you have different navigation where we click on different links maybe to different parts on your website. Then having a main section. This is the main section of your web page, right? And then here's a part that you may have a side part. A lot of times you can see advertisements over here, secondary content, sometimes on the other, on a side, right? A side could be on you can actually move that. It doesn't have to be on the right-hand side. It could be on the left-hand side as well, right? And then also having a footer, right? Footers, usually you have these at the bottom where you usually have copyrights down here. For things we'll be doing, you probably have your name, right? But usually, you have some information. You might have your social links. Sometimes you have links to your sitemap, things like that, right? A lot of times terms of use, there's many different things could potentially be down here in a footer. So labeling the wireframe with semantic tags turns a visual sketch into a structural plan. So when you sit down to write the HTML, the skeleton's already decided, right? Creating a web page template. Okay, the template is a predefined HTML document containing the shared structure of every web page. Instead of rewriting the same header, navigation, footer, you write them once and then you reuse it, right? So basically, like we've kind of learned, we can, use that Emmet to create the basic structure. But then within there, you're going to want to probably add some semantic structure as well, right? And a header, a nav, a main, a footer, right? So static content that appears on every page, such as a logo, navigation links, and copyright notices, right? Also comments making where each section ends and where the unique page content will be added, so that can be beneficial. So this is actually how, so we've seen all of this, right? We're already very familiar with all that, right? So here's our new semantic elements, but we also have comments, okay? And this is showing, a little different. Yeah, it's probably right. It's just how it bleeds over. But basically, for a comment, you use the angle bracket and an exclamation point and a couple dashes, right? And we'll look at that more tomorrow. But that's how you go ahead and create those comments. So obviously, this is a user never sees this, right? This is just for a programmer's perspective, right? So we got our header here. Here's the H1 tag, is a heading 1 tag, right? Here's a nav where it's got a home. These aren't actual real usable links, but eventually we'll learn how to make all of these links, right? This is kind of just like stage 1. And that's what the book exercise is going to have you kind of do. You're just kind of going to do this in stages where, this won't be an active real link, but it's just showing you, how you can add that to a page. And then eventually we'll learn to use different tags to make them active links, okay? Primary page content here. You've got your main, right? Your main. Then here's your footer. This is what you use for copyright, right? The @ sign, right? The @ sign, well, the @ sign can cause some problems. So you can use what's called HTML entities to and this is called the ampersand copy semicolon. This will actually end up displaying, rendering the @ sign, the copyright sign, right? Okay, that's the footer. And then, usually, obviously, you always have to have HTML at the bottom. You're always going to have body. It's always going to usually be like this. You're going to have the end the body and end the HTML, right? Same up here. Well, the HTML is always at the very top. You have the body after the head, right? But everything, all your other stuff, the main, all these things, all these semantic elements are always going to be within your body, within your open and close body tag. Yep, just like I mentioned, save your work often. Obviously, when we had the, if you have autosave set up for Visual Studio Code, you're good there. If you don't, you need to make sure you save often, just so you don't accidentally close something and lose it. It happens every semester. Some students, it happens. So that's the beauty of the autosave. Might as well just go ahead and use that. So a comment is a note you leave inside your HTML document for yourself and other developers. Comments are ignored by the browser. They appear nowhere on the rendered page, right? They exist purely to explain the code. Real quick here, just since we're here, there's a lot in this document, so you're going to be seeing a lot. So you can right-click in here, right? You can view page source. So here is, and so a lot of this stuff is going to look foreign. Some of it's going to look normal, right? We've seen all of this, right? We've already seen that. Here's an icon. This is this little icon up here. The little W, that's the icon, right? So when you define this, we learn this later. When you define this, it'll put it right up there, okay? And I'll show you how to create. I create some simple little ones. I'm not, many of you might have some better ways to do it, but, I just kind of create some simple ones. I did one over here on the right-hand side. I did one for C#, right? I did this one just for the web technologies, W for web. But, this has some embedded cascading style sheets. Don't worry about all of this stuff, okay? But just kind of wanted to show you. So basically, you can see all your code of your page by viewing source, right? And there might be some things in here that aren't the best way to do things. But here, I just kind of wanted to search for something. So here's learning objectives, right? In this page. So this is a comment, right? This is how you put a comment. Like I said, it'll be in your code, and you see how you can actually view your code. Okay, once it's in the browser, right? Just do that right click and view. But this is a thing, and this will be the same thing. So when you bring the same whatever page you're using, bring this up in Visual Studio Code, obviously it's going to be there as well, right? But it's for that purpose, right? It's not really just to view within the browser. I'm just showing you that you can actually view things. And it comes very handy as time goes on, right? To do things like that as well, okay? Especially when you want to look at somebody else's, something else, you see some other pages. Sometimes you want to kind of see what they've done, right? Okay. So why use comments? Just for labeling sections so you can quickly find them by scrolling through long files, right? That's why some of that spacing is also important. I know the assignment told you, put a blank space after this paragraph, put a blank space after that paragraph. Just because, even though for that wasn't a big deal, but, in the real world, it sometimes does make a difference, right? Explain decisions. Another reason to use comments, so here these comments have just kind of been for this section, that section. But, sometimes you might be doing something, a little more complex, and it's very beneficial. And I'm sure any developer who follows you would be very happy that you put in a comment kind of explaining why you did or what you did. Sometimes I see comments, fix some error, fix some problem. We did this to, fix the page layout, etc. Right? Leaving reminders for yourself and your teammates, right? Temporarily hide, so you can actually temporarily hide code by, we'll look at that. You can use a comment to comment out lines of code, right? You just put that comment right around a group of code, right? Good versus bad comments, right? Yeah. So feature, product, section, update, weekly by marketing. Yeah, so this is helpful. If you got a header tag, no reason just to call it header, right? There's not a lot of benefit in there. If there's a reason to be more descriptive, probably should be more descriptive, right? Word wrap in your editor. When HTML line is long, it can cut off. Word wrap is a feature that causes lines. So we did set that when we set up, setting up your environment. You can change that. I think we changed it to 120 characters. You can change that to anything you want to start wrapping things. So we just start with 120, but if you want it to be less than that, okay. Blank lines in HTML harmless. As you can see, I kind of showed you an example of that where I put a whole bunch of blank lines and pulled it up with live server, and the browser ignores those, right? They're basically, when you put blank lines, so if you, one tag we haven't done before is the BR tag, which is a break. And that will actually, a BR tag will actually put a real true. You put 5 BR tags, the browser will put 5 lines in, okay? But that's when you're telling the browser, hey, I want another line here, right? Otherwise, sometimes we see the paragraphs seem to have a line. It's just because the paragraph tag in itself it does that just by default. Okay, it's going to put that on a new line. All right, we'll talk about that more in the future as well. Heading elements. So here's the different heading elements. HTML offers 6 levels. H1 the most important, down to H6 the least important. Headings organize content to a hierarchy and help both readers and search engines understanding the structure. Okay, so your H1 is usually going to be a page title, right? H2 is a major section, subsection, and you may not go all the way down, right? The important thing here is, and I'm just going to kind of mention it here, you don't really want to just say, I don't want to use an H1 tag, I just want to use an H4 tag at the top, and then later on I'm going to use an H2 tag. You really don't want to do that. There's reasons for that, and it's all of that accessibility and also the search engines. There's these, all these search engines, such as Google and so forth. They have robots that basically crawl the internet, right? And they're going to index all, you put pages out there, eventually it's going to get read, okay? It's actually going to get read. And not to get ranked is a whole different thing, right? Not easy to get ranked high just because you drop something out there on the internet, right? But, it's still going to eventually, your page is going to be read, right? They have crawlers that read all the pages, right? And so when you do have something that, you're wanting to get ranked high and stuff like that, doing these kinds of things are very important, right? Making sure that, an H1 is going to be your page title, right? And you're not just, your first title is an H4, and then later on you're using an H1. You don't want to do that within your code, right? Heading rules of thumb: use 1 H1 page per page. Okay. Don't skip levels, just like I said. Go from one H1 to an H2 to H3 in that order. Jumping from H1 straight to an H4 confuses screen readers. Okay. Use headings for structure, not for size. Okay. There's ways you can, if you just want bigger text, you can, when we learn CSS, we can change anything on a page to have bigger text or smaller text, right? Headings can carry meaning, not just visual weight, okay? You keep text short and descriptive, right? A heading shouldn't be a whole paragraph, right? Static content. Static content is fixed text, images and markup that doesn't change between visits to the page. So yeah, static content as opposed to dynamic content. Sometimes, some pages, depends on, how things are set up. Some pages have dynamic content, static content, especially early on, and a lot of like mom and pop things. They get somebody to build their website. It's just static content that never changes, right? The content gets put on there, no matter who goes, when they go, it's always going to be the same, right? Even if it gets updated, then it still stays the same after that's been updated, right? But what we're talking about dynamic content is like you click something and something makes a call to a backend server and it's going to bring back new content to the page, right? So that's more dynamic content as opposed to static content. Symbol entities. So some characters cannot be typed directly into HTML document. Either they have a special meaning in HTML, like the less than sign, right? Which starts a tag, right? So you can't, if you want something like that to display in your page, right? You have to do it. You have to use these symbol entities, right? But basically that, or they are not a standard keyboard like a copyright symbol or the exact, etc. Right? To display these characters, HTML provides character entities. Every entity starts with an ampersand and ends with a semicolon. Kind of looked at that earlier. We've seen that copy, right? Ampersand copy, right? That's an entity name. A short, memorable word between the ampersand and the semicolon. Easy to read, but not every character has a name. Okay. So we'll go through these some tomorrow. But here's some, there's entity names and entity numbers, right? So a non-breaking space. So a non-breaking space is like, let's say in our little paragraph that we created, we want to put an extra space between something, right? We want to put an extra space between something. We could use ampersand non-breaking space. That will just put an extra space right there and there, okay? Now, besides that, so they're entity names, entity numbers. This here is the same thing as this, okay? Less than sign, ampersand less than, TL, is the same thing as ampersand pound 60, okay? This is the number for that. It means the same thing. And etc. So here's one for greater than, here's one for an ampersand as well, right? Sometimes if you use ampersand in the right context, you're fine. Other times you cannot use it in certain contexts. And that's where you need to have it like this, okay? A double quotation mark, right? Like that. Copyright, registered trademark, trademark sign itself, euro sign, right? For dollars, euro signs, right? Bullet, that's a bullet, okay? All right, we'll look into them a little bit more tomorrow. So here's a non-breaking space. Entity written as a non-breaking space. So basically when you do this, okay, it will put 1, 2 spaces in between home and menu, right? Just extra spaces, right? You put it right there within your content. So, yeah, once again, the UTF-8 covers nearly all the characters for every language, which reduces the need for entity codes. So sometimes you get away with doing it. It's just in certain circumstances you can't, right? You still need entities for HTML special characters. Less than, greater than, ampersand, right? But when in doubt, you need to use the different entity names. Validating HTML documents. So validation is the process of checking your HTML against W3 standard. A validator reads the file, compares it to the official rules, and reports any mistakes. I will go through this tomorrow. So we'll go through some of these chapter 2 things tomorrow since we're kind of running out of time today. But there's a site right here that you can actually go to, and it will go ahead and validate your thing, your HTML. And you're going to be required to do that for some of these assignments, and you'll have to just save that as an image and check that into your code base, right? And so we'll take a look at how to do that. Common validation errors, obviously missing tags, right? Stray tag, missing required attributes. Some require, some have required attributes. Okay. Creating pages from a template. So you open your template file, save as, update the title. It's just showing you to, basically once you create your template, you're just going to update it for each thing you're doing. Adding paragraphs to a main section, pretty straightforward there. So we're not going to be uploading to a website, web server or anything like that. We will later on. We'll probably just we're going to use GitHub IO for your portfolio, so you'll learn about that. Best practices, having to make a template-based development smooth. So the more important things you kind of want to mention, we already know how to do the quick one using the Emmet abbreviations, but you want to use those semantic tags as well. Okay. Always remember you only want one H1 tag, and you always want to follow them in order. You don't have to use every single one of them. You might just have H1, H2, H3, right? And you don't have any of the other ones, but you want to follow them in the right order, right? H1 first, H2, and then H3. And if there, for some reason, you just want to make some text bigger for some reason, back in the old day, well, people still do it. One way is just, make it into a title, and but there's other ways to do that, okay? Better ways. Keep file and folder names lowercase. Validate before you publish. Keep the template pristine, okay? All right. So I think these quick guides are helpful. I would use these to kind of look through, especially, sometimes some of those chapters can kind of be a little cluttered, hard to kind of follow along. And I think these things kind of help a little bit. They do for me. So that's kind of all I have for today. Please let me know if you have any questions. Tomorrow I will go over some more chapter 2 stuff, just some of these things I was mentioning. And I do want to kind of look at some of those other assignments and where we're going to do those. I mean, I do want to use those other folders, but I just kind of want to look through that a little more just to make sure I have things in order for that. And then also we'll go through chapter 3 as well tomorrow. So please let me know if you have any questions. And if obviously to get any of your assignments done, you need to have your GitHub repository, both remote and locally on your machine. Obviously you have to get into, for written tests, you have to be able to get into Inside Rankin. So I will see you all tomorrow, and have a good day.